Alright, let's talk about three more theatrical releases, because we just talked about streaming, and then tomorrow we're going to go back to streaming. But then after that, Video Tuesday will be more theatrical releases with Beast and Bodies, 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 so we'll have that. But in the meantime, let's talk about these three, and I want to start with Vengeance. And the first thing I want to say about Vengeance is that I imagine a lot of people were probably having the same thought that I was, which was, you hear that B.J. Novak wrote and directed a movie, and it's like, oh, you think like, oh, so everybody from The Office is gonna be a writer and director now. How funny. But here's the thing, is that if Krasinski becoming a writer and director gave us the Quiet Place movies, and B.J. Novak becoming a writer-director gave us this movie, I'm good with pretty much anybody and everybody from The Office becoming a writer-director, if this is the kind of quality we're going to be getting. So, to start off with this, it does seem like I wasn't in love with it right away, because it does have a lead character, which Novak plays, that does seem like it's going to be like one of those movies with a very unlikable character at the center of it, that thinks they're above everything and isn't aware that they're an unlikable character, in the sense that the audience can still somehow feel something for them. You kind of fear it's going to be something like that, especially since he starts off. I was getting a lot of vibes of Justin Long's character in Tusk, where he's this really douchebag, podcaster who's going to go to this place and hopefully look down on everybody in his mind, and then that'll get him some sort of level of fame. Like, everything that he does is going to be everything that he gets himself into is an opening for his own personal gain, regardless of what it is. And it also seems a bit weird that he so willingly gets himself into things that he so clearly doesn't want to. But once again, this is just somebody that's completely driven by, what can I gain from this, and can I get more of a popularity in what I do? Because he's just this sort of low-level journalist at this moment that wants to kind of be one of those big names that's kind of in this podcasting universe. As he and Issa Rae kind of figure this out together as they go when they get this opportunity. And he essentially wants to make the next, or write the next In Cold Blood, is one thing he mentions. And what's interesting about this is once he actually gets to Texas, where this movie takes place, where he's going to meet this whole family of people that he's under the impression that he's significantly above intellectually, is that you would think, oh, I see where this is going. It's going to be the douchebag character that meets these people and then, finds a heart within himself. Because this family has lost their daughter slash sister slash whatever, who is somebody that he had a fling with a few times but completely forgot about, because that's just his thing. He doesn't even have names in his phone. It's just people and places, basically. So this is somebody he's long since forgotten about, but she got attached enough that apparently her family was under the impression that he was a significant boyfriend. So, like a very high priority in both of their lives, when this was very one-sided, obviously. And so he sort of weasels his way in and decides that this is an opportunity once her brother, Boyd Holbrook, who's great in this, gets the idea that he doesn't think it was an accident like it appeared to be. He thinks it was murder, and he wants to find out who did it and make this whole investigation. So, podcast opportunity right there. So he jumps on it immediately. And like I was saying, you would think, even despite this dark subject matter, you still get the vibe that this is going to be a guy that has a change of heart the more he's around these people, especially since the family's just so charming in general. But what's interesting about it is how unpredictable pretty much all of the characters in this movie are. Because you would think it'd be one of those things where the joke is that they're a lot smarter than he thinks they are, and maybe he's not as smart as he thinks he is, but it's all kind of leveled out, where he's clearly a smart character in the way in which he goes about what he's doing and how he's able to accomplish those things, and also just the outlooks that he has in general, even if they are a bit, I guess you could say preachy, maybe, for just lack of a better word. But at some point he'll open up. But the other side of this is that they're not. It's not really like he's trying to play a trick on you, and it's like you think the character's one thing, but it's actually another, because the family is, in one sense, exactly who he thinks they are, but in another sense, also a lot smarter than they appear to be, and you're never quite sure. You're never quite sure which one of those is going to show up from every given situation. Where it's like he'll say one thing, and they might respond in this completely sort of oblivious way, or this borderline idiotic way, a way that he would expect them to, and then in another moment he'll say something, and then they'll completely take it in another direction. Like when he's talking about Liam Neeson movies, because they're talking about vengeance to Boyd Holbrook, and he says, like this, it's like, this isn't a Liam Neeson movie or anything like that. And the Liam Neeson movie, that Boyd Holbrook's character, the guy that's supposed to be the idiot, the first Liam Neeson movie he thinks of is Schindler's List. And it's stuff like that where you're never quite sure which direction those characters are going to go in, because it's balanced out to where it could be either one. And you're never sure if they're going to have this great, epiphany moment, or he's going to have to try to help catch them up a little bit. And I really love that, just in general, with the way that sort of humanizes the character so much, because that's really, much as you would hate to say it and as cynical as it might sound, that is kind of the way people are, where when you meet them, you kind of get in your mind like, I know exactly who this person is, and there are aspects of that person that probably are going to be exactly what you think they are at first glance, but they also are 100% capable of surprising you also. And so to make the characters like that, I feel like really put a reality in these characters where anytime there's a when we get to that inevitable turnaround where it's like, oh, maybe I relate to these people more than I think, and maybe these people aren't so bad, maybe I can, open my heart to them or whatever, it doesn't feel like it's some cliche or like it was just some inevitable moment. It just kind of gradually gets there in a way that feels real with the characters. So and that's going to be setting the whole foundation of everything that happens here, which is extremely important. So the fact that he was able to pull that off extremely well with the characters and make all the characters sort of memorable and likable in their own way and unique in their own way was really important to how this story is being told and how everything is going to come together in a way that works. Not just like story-wise and writing-wise, but like emotion-wise also. So I can't say enough good things about that. And just in general, how much they actually feel like a real family. There's even a point where the mother is J. Smith Cameron and one of the daughters is Dove Cameron, and it's like, I know these two people very well. I've seen them in many other things, but it's like they introduced themselves so well as a family. I had to, when I got back here, one of the first things I did was look up to make sure J. Smith Cameron and Dove Cameron are not actually related. They're not, of course, as I figured, but that I even had to look it up. It just shows how well they fit together, how much it actually, like, they almost start to look alike. They're that well-established of a family. And the other thing here also is talking about how the Novak character interacts with these people and how it can be very intentionally pompous, where he makes a lot of these, like, digs that aren't so subtle but might seem subtle to the people hearing them, to where he can insult them to their face and they have no idea, and it's because they go by so fleetingly. He's one of those guys where it's like, what's great about him is that he's actually, the reason I wasn't completely put off by him was because I was finding his digs funny. Like there's a moment where he insults Rebecca Black at one point, and he takes digs at like Twitter and Reddit and stuff like that, and I do find that stuff quite funny and quite accurate. But at the same time, it's like, having said that, if I knew this guy in real life, I'd probably be constantly restraining the urge to deck him, like, at all times, because he's so pompous. But nevertheless, as a movie character, he manages to work as both those things, where it's a character that you want to see accomplish his goals, but at the same time you can, like, he's unlikable enough that you know he has to go through a change, but you're willing to stick with him through that change to see that happen. So that's going to work a lot for this also. Another thing is that how consistent this is, not just in his character or the family members, but like every character in this, there is a run-in with a drug dealer that goes in pretty much the last direction I expected it to. And the fact that that can continue, like how, like, that's just a recurring thing in general throughout the movie, is how strongly character based it is one of its really huge strengths. And it's like you can do that, but you also have to make sure you have those moments where, like, the characters are unpredictable without it feeling like the movie's just kind of going all over the map just to try to fake you out or just to try to trick you. But it's like, as soon as it goes in one direction that's really unpredictable, it kind of starts to set in before the scene's even over. Like, yeah, okay, I actually, it feels like this is the direction this should go, and like it makes sense that this character is actually this and maybe not actually this, depending on what the setup is. But now that we're talking about all these other characters, the one that I really have to single out, which I imagine has to be, when you look at other reviews, probably the most singled out character here. I I just had to really sort of bask in this thought because it was occurring to me very quickly. Because this person only has 2 scenes, I think, 2 extended scenes. But this is a sentence I never expected myself to say. So I'm just kind of basking in the moment. So, I think Ashton Kutcher might give one of my favorite performances of the year so far in this. Like I said, I think he only has 2 extended scenes, and that's it. But they are the best scenes in the movie, both times. But and like I said, with all the other rich characters that are going on in here, and the good story that it's got going on, that really says something. That a character with only 2 scenes can have the 2 best scenes in the movie, and a lot of that is based on this performance, but also very much in the writing also. But just on his first scene alone, it was like, and I don't want to just completely, bash Kutcher, especially since I want nothing more than to put him on a pedestal after this movie, but it was almost like he was so good in his first scene, his very first scene, like the first part of his first scene, I felt like I was hallucinating or something, where it's like, there's no way this is Ashton Kutcher, right? Like punked Ashton Kutcher, or like Dude, Where's My Car? There's no way this is like him. Like somebody's in his skin or something. But no, it's incredible. And like I said, the writing obviously plays a big part in this also. But to have to deliver this, because I think another problem a lot of people might have with this movie is that it is one of those movies where it might feel like the characters speak in speeches a lot. Like I said, the writing is so good though, and the performances really have to carry that along also, that somehow that never bothered me. And it's like, looking back on it, it's like, there's a lot. There's a lot of monologues and a lot of speeches in this movie. Yet when I was watching it, I didn't really notice that. I only noticed all of that after the fact. And it's like a lot of the movie. So I could see that being put off, but like I was saying, I can imagine it being criticized as being preachy or something like that. Like, there's a moment towards the end where BJ Novak, like, kind of blows up, and he's saying things of like a political nature that could be seen as like extremely obvious and preachy and on the nose and stuff like that. But number one, it was hard to get mad at because he wasn't saying anything that I really disagreed with. But that's a whole other can of worms as far as like something the movie explores about, following that kind of thing. But the other thing is in the idea of, a differing opinion and which one you follow and stuff like that. That's like a whole theme of the movie, so it's very ironic that I even say that. But the other thing though is that I didn't find it, like, it wasn't distractingly preachy to me because it felt less on the nose than a scene like that normally would, and more just like it was a character reaching his breaking point. And it was like, being so late in the movie, it felt like it made sense that this character was giving this speech at this time in the story. But then once again, it's the way the characters react to it that's also equally important, if not probably more important than what he's even saying in this moment. So, but going back to the whole Kutcher thing of him giving one of my favorite performances of the year, I'm trying to figure out exactly what it is. I feel like there are performances to compare it to and characters to compare it to, but it stands alone on it by itself so much and so impressively that I can't think of those names off the top of my head. Like, this performance feels like something in and of itself, and his writing feels like something in and of itself. that's all, like, I just get so wrapped up in those scenes, and that's just a beautiful thing. Like, it's just, whether acting, writing, whatever it is, it's, yeah, it's what we go to movies for, is to have the feelings like this, the feelings I was having while watching this movie, which is great. Um, and despite, its heavy its heavy nature and what some might call its preachy nature, it also never forgets that it's a comedy. Like, it does go down, certain paths that are dark and has to stick with them, but there's never really a tonal problem, and it feels like there absolutely could have been under, I was gonna say less experienced hands, but this is Novak's first movie, which is amazing. But yeah, but like the whole bit where we keep hearing throughout the movie how useless the cops are in a place like where this is set. And then the fact that we actually later get a scene that really demonstrates at its fullest why and how the cops are so useless in this moment. And you immediately buy, like, okay, that explains that completely, and you get a sense of how the sort of lawlessness that's going on around here and how everybody kind of creates their own sort of rules that they live by, and then should things clash, then things clash, and that's the way it's going to go. So I really like that in general. I guess the only other thing that I can say without going into too much, because I really don't want to give too much away at all, because I think people should absolutely seek this out. Um, Here's the thing, is that when you're watching a movie that's really good, and you get that moment where it hooks you, and then it's going, there's so many instances. It happens more often than it doesn't. And that is when a movie feels great, and then you want it to get to its climax, and then you want it to get just that one extra push in the climax that keeps it in that great territory. More often than not, movies have a really great beginning and middle, and then they can't quite get there. Like, it goes from a great movie for 2/3, and then the last third is like, it's still good, but it didn't get over that one little speed bump, and now it's just a good movie instead of a great one. Um, I was really wondering if this was going to be one of those movies, because I was really having a bad feeling it might be, where it's like, I always get paranoid now when I'm this hooked, because it's like, the last little bit's probably going to just not completely fuck it up, just make it go from great to good. Because that just happens so often, especially with movies like this. And here's how much this movie exceeded that thought. Um, Without saying anything at all, the climax of this movie is two characters having a conversation. I want to say it's probably maybe a 10-minute scene. And it's two characters having a conversation. And this conversation is going for a while, because like I said, it's probably about a 10-minute scene or so. And then it reaches a point. And it's like, this is the point where the movie's either going to be great or it's going to be good. And you want great. And a character said something. A character was in mid-sentence. And when this character said this, I knew where the conversation was going from there. And when I figured out where this character was going with what he was saying and the direction he was taking this conversation, I said, wow, out loud. Like, in the theater, I said out loud, I just said, wow, when I realized where this was going. And that never happens. Ever. So, that's the kind of feeling that you always hope to get out of a movie, but feels so rare. And it was because the moment was so well written, so well delivered by the actor, and just so perfectly built up to. Like, it feels like everything in the movie was building up to this conversation going into the direction that it does. And it kind of blew my mind from a writing standpoint and an acting standpoint, really. So it's a really special moment when you get to that point, to where you know the movie's gonna make or break, or at least go from great to good, and it's able to maintain itself, if not exceed itself a little bit. And that's why I think I really come... Like, the rest of the movie is great, but I feel like it's that moment, that whole last scene, that 10-minute scene there I was talking about with the conversation, is when it was like, okay, this movie is definitely something else, and something I'm definitely going to revisit probably multiple times. I want, like right now as I talk about it, I want to see this movie again. So that's... Yes. So, like I said, I feel like that's the most I can say without saying too much. So, if I can convince anybody to see this movie that hasn't yet, I want to do that. So, there's that. Um, let's go to the second movie, which is Fall, which I had no idea really what it was, but I noticed it was in, like, all the theaters. Like, what the hell even is this thing? The only other time this happens is with those religious movies, or those Pure Flix movies or something. But I had no idea what this was. I'm not familiar with the two main actresses. Unfortunately, I don't remember their names right now either. That's how unfamiliar I am. But I do recognize some people that have like 1.5 to 2 minutes of screen time. Starting with Mason Gooding, who is playing the husband of our lead character. And the two girls who are the stars of this and Mason Gooding are climbing a mountain in the opening scene, and then he falls to his death. And so after our main character goes into a downward spiral because of this, and we get a caption that says 51 weeks later, which I thought was quite odd until dialogue refreshed my memory and I realized, oh yeah, because it's a week shy of a year. That's why it was weirdly specific. And I guess that's the least awkward way to say that, I guess. But the dialogue would have just done it anyway, but whatever. So to honor him and then kind of get her out of her downward spiral, they come up with the brilliant plan to climb a rusty old, like, TV tower that is 2,000 feet high. Uh, and that's going to be what the movie is. And they're going to get up there and they're going to get stuck, and that's what the movie is. So it's going to be like these stranded survival modes that we've seen before, like 127 Hours and Open Water, and there's a few more. Frozen, Adam Green's Frozen, the ski lift movie came to mind. There was another movie that's kind of off the radar that it was taking me back to, was the movie Mine with Armie Hammer. Just these things where like one or two characters are stranded in one place in the middle of nowhere, and they have to survive the conditions and all that, and to the point that it feels like a horror movie, when it's probably more so a survival movie than anything else. But here's the thing, is this movie was a bit different as far as I go, because if I were to watch a movie like the ones I mentioned, there's a lot of stuff I could talk about that's hypothetical, where it's like, oh, if I had a certain fear, or if, this or whatever, it's gonna be the movie's job to really, really put you in the character's perspective so that you can feel their fear. And depending on, the audience's fears, sometimes you may not have to work that hard to do that. Sometimes you might have to work really hard to get that and make sure the character's fear is very palpable through the screen in order to get to the audience so that they feel the same thing. This movie, it might be easier for me to criticize this movie more if not for the fact that I'm going to be one of those audience members where a movie like this, you can terrify me right away. You can give me a full-on anxiety attack for a straight 2 hours without having to worry about anything. And I'm always going to be in that moment feeling that. Because at the beginning, when they get there, the other girl refers to the tower as stomach-turningly massive. And that is pretty much the perfect description. I don't know if I've talked about this before, and I don't want to bombard you with like personal details, but I mean just to really set the scene here of what experiencing this movie was like. Not only do I have a terrible vertigo problem, but there's like heights have always been an issue, but the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize about vertigo is that it goes in both directions. That you fear what's below you if you're really high up, and if you're on the ground, things that are really high just merely existing near you is a problem, a really, really big problem. But there's also the wide open spaces thing, where, like, walking through open parking lots, just, which I can, and it's the thing, it's that feeling of anything above you at all. Like, if I'm walking in broad daylight through, like, an open parking lot or an open field or something, it's the feeling of anything looming over you gives you that sensation of potentially being able to fall upwards. It's a really weird thing. Like when you're up really high and you get that sensation of, oh god, I could drop. It's the same feeling. So it's like the sun. Like if I'm walking in a wide open space and I can feel the sun above me, just the heat from it and knowing that it's up there, that feeling is there the whole time. And it's anything. So this movie is essentially a nightmare. I've talked before about going to movies and having to be stuck in some of the front rows and and that's all of this is bad. So, movies like this, I believe I also talked about this when The Walk was out, this Zemeckis movie based on Man on Wire. Absolute fucking nightmare. Yeah, this whole thing. And the funny thing is that normally I would complain if something starts to look fake and say like, oh, it's obvious CGI or it's obvious green screen or something, but they do so well at making this feel as real as they possibly can. When there were moments where I noticed, oh, that looked CGI or oh, that looked fake, which are few and far between, I wasn't mad at it. I didn't want to criticize it. I felt better. It was like, oh, good, that looked fake. Thank God. So, like I said, if there's problems with this movie, they're probably going to be less likely to be found by me, because of this. Just in general, the movie was doing its job most of the time. So, when you get those moments where it feels especially real with certain details, especially when they're climbing and like the main girl freezes and like starts to panic and can't move. Been there many times. And then it's like, as they go higher, the way the wind is blowing and the way the wind sounds, and it's like how just everything feels like it's going to be a tiny push, and a tiny push is going to be the death of you. This is, yeah. And then I was talking about the sun. How just feeling the sun above me if I'm in a really open space is going to freak me out. We get shots in this where they're on the very top of the tower and the sun is in the sky and the sun looks like it's directly next to them. It would never... I would never get through that. And then there's the point in time where the sun goes down, and of course they're straight in the middle of nowhere and they're at this height. It's going to be pitch blackness. So pitch blackness is another thing that's a whole other can of worms of freaking me out. I have to sleep with the TV on, stuff like that. I can't do pitch blackness, but you know what I might take pitch blackness over in this instance? Maybe, I don't know. I wouldn't take any of this. But, like I said, that sensation of something feeling like it's above me, making this significantly worse. It's like you're already this high up. Those fucking towers have those red, giant-ass red lights on them. So it's like, I put myself in their position, and it's like, oh, light, thank God we're not in complete blackness, but then it's like, you're up at this height, and you feel like something, you can feel something directly above you with the red light. I don't know how my heart survived this movie, quite honestly. This is one of those movies where it wasn't because of the movie being bad, where it was like I was so relieved that it was over. I'm panicking a little bit, just kind of thinking back to it and trying to talk about it, but, yeah, okay. Where were we? Yeah, okay, so as far as obstacles also, and talking about, like, the way that she freezes up when she's climbing, they put shit in here, like the satellites in the middle of the ladder, when they're trying to get to the top, and it's like, the fact that they have something they have to go around, and it's like, and it's also, like, the idea of checkpoints also, where checkpoints can make something just feel, like, even bigger than it already is, and then it's like, you feel like you reach a certain height when you reach these satellites, and you realize how much is left. And it's like, there's a point in time where she even says something like, it's like 30 feet, but it's going to feel like 1,000 or something like that, and that feels very real. Like, you get the sense, like, yeah, I feel that. I'm just sitting here, in a movie theater or whatever, but I get that. Um, yeah. So, with that said, and what I was saying about how, interestingly enough, obvious CGI is going to feel like a savior, um, let's try to look at it from, like I said, just this movie existing at all and having this concept. Yeah, if it look, a huge accomplishment of this movie is the fact that I am freaking out just trying to talk about it, let alone, trying to sit through it. But the idea of there being things to actually criticize. Because obviously the movie is very much doing its job well. Because, like, if the whole thing just looked like shitty green screen, I wouldn't be having this problem. If the movie was shittily made, I wouldn't be having this problem. So something absolutely 100% was accomplished here in a good way. So when I look at it, there's stuff like there are some solutions that feel like they might be kind of a reach, and some obstacles that are thrown in that kind of feel like it's a little bit stretched out. Where this is a movie that's like an hour 40 something. It's actually almost like an hour 50, which is pretty long for a sort of single location survival movie with two people like this. So it seems like something that could have been cut down, and I can imagine probably some stuff at the beginning could have been cut down, and a couple of the problems here and there could have been cut down also, or taken out entirely, because the thing about this is usually I would say, oh, it's a movie. It doesn't realism is overrated because it's a movie. There will be moments that are fantastical and stuff like that, but realism does play a huge part in movies like this. Where, like, the more real it feels and the more realistic it feels, the more terrifying it's going to be. It's a pretty crucial part of movies like this. So, in this particular case, I would have to say that if there's things that feel like they're kind of a reach, those are things that I would say are sort of proper criticisms of it, I guess. There's also some personal conflict stuff, as you would expect. One in particular that's very there's, like, very obvious clues from the get-go about it, so you're just kind of waiting for the moment where it's revealed. But then the thing that's almost kind of annoying about that, even though it's like, yeah, we know this, we've been down this road, it does seem weird that conflict doesn't seem to have much effect on what's going on. It's like, yeah, obviously there's bigger things at play here, but at the same time it's like, how much of a reason is there to introduce that conflict to begin with, given the effect the very small effect it seems to have, with obvious, other things here doing the heavy lifting about the emotional distress that these characters are in already. And there is one of the movie's really big moments, is also something that feels like it's supposed to be a really, really big moment, but at the same time it's like, I feel like we've seen that a lot. So even that's supposed to be like a really big moment didn't feel as, big as it was probably supposed to be as vague as possible. But, yeah, so I can definitely see where there's probably problems here that are kind of going past me a little bit because it's so effective, because of the fears that I have. So props, for me having like a near anxiety attack for a straight 2 hours. But there are certain things in here that probably could have been cut out and could have made it better and more suspenseful if it had just kind of, if they'd maybe taken out some of the more things that are obviously a bit of a stretch. But yeah, so there's that. And there's like 2 minutes of Jeffrey Dean Morgan, which is always nice. So more of him is always good, but for his place in the story here, I guess that's about right, I suppose. Because I will say another thing that I do like is how we didn't really cut to anything else. That it did, because something that the not-so-great movies of this nature will do is they'll lose faith being able to, maintain audience attention with their concept, and they'll jump around a bit. But I like that they did avoid that. Like, we're at the tower. Like, the whole time they're at the tower, we're at the tower. So I do appreciate that. But there are still moments here where it probably could have been sort of swifter and more concise, which would have probably amped up the tension a little more. So without some stretches where it's like, oh, we're doing this thing that we've seen before, and we're doing that thing we've seen before, and all that. So, but yeah, it's effective in every other instance. So, good on you. Let's go ahead and end with Mack and Rita, which is another shitty Diane Keaton movie. That's kind of in this area after like that sort of mid 2000s area where we had a lot of feel good, for lack of a more tactful way to say it, old people comedies, I guess you could say, where it's like we're basically the whole joke is a person is old and they're doing things that old people don't typically do, and it's supposed to be hilarious. This movie goes all in on that. That's basically the movie's whole concept, like from the whole start, because it does have a charming concept. At first, it's basically like if we had 13 Going on 30, and just Jenna Ring could never be pleased. So it's like now instead of a 13-year-old girl that wants to be 30, we now have a 30-year-old woman that wants to be even older. But the concept is that she grew up with her grandma and was raised by her grandma, so she basically was like an old soul her whole life. Which makes sense if you're raised that way and you grew up around, older people and all that. So by the time she gets to be 30 and all of her friends are, I guess, typical 30-year-olds, whatever that means, and feels like she's this old woman trapped in this young body. And then and it lets you know right away what kind of comedy it is. That's not a good thing. Sometimes it can be. In this case, it's not, because we're about 5 minutes in when a dog pisses on somebody. So take that for what you will. And so it's kind of not really gone into what makes her turn from this 30-year-old woman into Diane Keaton, apart from just really wanting to be older. With respect to Diane Keaton, we'll say older. But Simon Rex is there, and Simon Rex may or may not be this guy that can make this happen. That's vague, and then not so vague. I don't know. She gets into a tanning bed, she gets out, she's Diane Keaton, magic happened. And now we get to laugh, because it's old Diane Keaton doing Pilates, getting high, and it's like an old person doing Pilates, hilarious. Old person getting high, hilarious. And on and on and on it goes. Like I said, very, very generic early 2000s feel-good movie. Just somehow found its way into 2022. Which is what I feel like the last few Diane Keaton movies have been, if not more. And she's obviously shown that she can really, really own this genre and really kind of take it a step above. But I'm really wondering if that time has passed, or is it not her that can be blamed, but she's just really choosing a lot of shitty scripts lately? Maybe? Because I would say this is a shitty script. I feel like the one compliment I can give this movie is when it seemed to fast forward through another cliche of this. When you see the whole, I guess you could still call it body swap, but I don't know if you call it swap when there's not a second body. But like there's not somebody in a young body. It's just this 30-year-old in Diane Keaton's body. But the fact that you're gonna have to convince somebody that this is what's happened, and it's like, so we've seen this thing over and over again, and I love the fact that she pretty much convinces her friend immediately. Like, they really just don't mess around with it. It's just like she basically believes it right away. And it's like, I want to say that that's a bad thing, and it's very lazy writing, but at the same time, it's like, we've seen that so many times, I'm kind of not even mad that we just skipped over it. And it's like, okay, she believes her. So, so it's got that going for it, I guess, but it skips past that bullshit, but then goes into every single other bullshit thing we've seen a billion times before. You will never guess what the center of most of the conflicts is in this movie. Of course it's a goddamn wedding. It's always a wedding, and it's always very contrived, and the friend here, by the way, is Taylor Page from Zola, which kind of feels like a waste of her, because all this, really the only directions would go here after, the whole setting up, she knows but nobody else knows, and they set up this whole contrived thing about how, I'm actually her aunt and we've swapped houses for whatever reason. And it's, yeah, then that's all it is. The rest of the movie is just oh, Diane Keaton's doing this, and it's funny because she's old. She's doing that, it's funny because she's old. Repeat and repeat and repeat until we get to some contrived conflict that makes everybody all sad and go their separate ways. And it's all the shit we've seen before. Everything's boring, everything's obvious. It goes down a fucking social media path, because of course everything has to. All the bad comedies go down a social media path where it's like, oh, this person's popular now, and it's like, oh, once again, she's old, popular on social media. Oh, that doesn't go together. How hilarious! It's a real piece of shit, this movie. And then they also go into the whole thing where she eventually, obviously, has the love story with the younger guy. And you might think, okay, that's worked before. Remember how funny Jamie Lee Curtis and Chad Michael Murray were in Freaky Friday? That was great and hilarious. This is... Every single scene they have together is so astonishingly boring. It's incredible. And it's like, in the idea of like seeing Diane Keaton try to have chemistry with this really young dude that's like 40 years younger or something. You would think like just even the nature of that would be like, there's got to be something interesting here. No, it's like the scenes are just boring. And and that's the thing, is like they're trying to be like charming and I'm guessing semi-romantic. And it's like, it feels like they're not even really trying to be funny in the way that the Jamie Lee Curtis Chad Michael Murray scenes were. So I don't even know what's supposed to be going on. I don't know. And shitty editing is obviously going to be the death of this also. There's scenes that feel like they just sort of abruptly end, like a lot of the time. And while clearly that's also a saving grace because all the scenes suck, still, it's not helping anything at all. It's making the movie feel really sort of cobbled together and chopped up and all that. And like, it's in a big damn hurry to get somewhere, to the next boring contrived conflict, I guess, or the next boring contrived comedic Diane Keaton throwing herself around, embarrassing herself kind of thing. I don't know. And it's just it's trying so hard to be charming. And usually, if a movie is trying that hard to be charming, especially a movie like this, eventually you start to give in, and it's like something comes through where you're like, okay, because they're trying so hard, it is starting to get charming. But no, the harder they tried, and they try really, really hard, you just start to feel sorry for it, and that's not a good feeling. That's not the kind of... The movie is supposed to be a feel-good movie. That's kind of the last feeling you want to have, is just feeling sorry for a movie for existing. Feeling sorry for the people that are in it. And people like Wendy Malick and like Lois Smith are all in here. Loretta Devine. And they're just in a, oh, funny because old movie. So... that's all this is. That's all this movie is. That's all it's got. So it was just going to try to coast on Diane Keaton here, and that's not working out. So that's what that is. So that's going to be it. So the next thing we're going to talk about is The New Orphan, I think, and 13 Lives. And then we're going to have 2 live videos, and then after those we're going to talk about Beast and Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. And then we'll go from there. I think August should almost be over by then. And then awards, we'll talk about award stuff at the end of the month, like we do. So, yeah. So there's a shitload of stuff coming. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.